Galaxy 666 by Hel Torah. Session 22.
Chapter 7. The Space Greyhound shook and shuddered as the rocket drives thudded and reverberated into life. "We're definitely coming in," said Bronit. Oski looked ruefully at the remains of a shattered computer.
"I must have been wacky,"
he said.
"I must have been stark raving space crazy when I did that."
"Well, too late to dwell on it now," said Bronit.
"I must have been crazy."
"I think we are all a little crazy," said Ishklaw.
"Well, that's a little compensation, I suppose,"
said Oski.
"Misery loves company when all's said and done. There's nothing quite so bad as making a last stand entirely on your own. But there's 6 of you, 100 of you, or even a whole regiment. It's much better."
"Who's talking about last stands?"
said Korzak.
"We're not on the defensive, boy. We're going into attack. The bad phase is over. There are thousands of galaxies which are a part of the Empire. Thousands of galaxies," he repeated.
"So?"
said Oski interrogatively.
"Do you think all those galaxies just came up and said, 'We want to join'? Do you think those hundreds of thousands of millions of planets of the Empire with their strange and varied life forms, their different cultures and developments, do you think they suddenly came along and said, 'We think it would be a good idea, please pass us a subscription form and we'll join'?"
"Well, no, I suppose not,"
agreed Oski.
"You're a historian," said Korzak. "Have you read the galactic history?"
"Well, history's so big that I have to keep to Earth history. Classical stuff, you know."
"I know. University syllabus Option A from the Industrial Revolution to the dawn of the Space Age. Option B, the Atomic Era. Studies all supposed to be more specific and detailed for students taking this paper."
He laughed.
"Oh, what the devil! History, stellarography, universography, planetonomy, astrogation, all the sciences, all the studies. They mean nothing without the mind of the man behind them. They are only clever words that we've thought up."
"No time to be a philosopher," said Bronit. "We've got to come in on purely visual perception. It'll be like bringing a sailing ship into harbor with no tugs to help in a very rough wind blowing off the land."
"We'll get in," said Korzak. "We've got to get in. This could well be the same apocryphal planet that picked up my grandfather, old Bion. I want to see whether my experiences will tie in with his."
"That's a challenge we can't ignore," said Bronit. "Who's ignoring it?" said Ishklaw. They laughed. It was a more natural laugh than they had uttered for some time. The ship continued to vibrate as the mighty rocket motors poured their power into the space around them. There were circumstances in which that power might have been called great, but out here, pitting itself against the darkness of outer space, they seemed minute, almost pathetically minute. It was a tense, anxious time as they began the final landing orbit. They had no mechanical aids, no electronic devices to tell them anything about the strange surface on which they were landing, like the softly inviting pads of an insectivorous plant looking up at an insect. There was a peculiar purple twilight everywhere now as they came lower. It was a deep, dark purple, and yet, although it was deep and dark, it had a strange transparency about it. You could see quite a long way, despite the apparent absence of light. It was almost as though human vision could penetrate this peculiar purple as easily as a radar beam penetrated fog in the 20th century back on Earth. Every man was standing by his post. "Wrap up," said Bronit tersely. "Safety straps, quick!" Straps slid into buckles. Harnesses rattled against their wall bracers. Bronit was concentrating every ounce of his not inconsiderable skill into getting the ship down in one piece. They were tossing now like a cork that had been tossed into a roadside Niagara, disappearing down a drain like a tiny singing bird being buffeted by a particularly ferocious gale against which its tiny pinions were practically useless. "7 green moons!" panted Bronit. "I didn't bargain for this kind of atmospheric density."
"It's a tornado in anybody's language,"
shouted Korzak. "It's something we could have done without," agreed Ishklaw.
"Leaving the fancy names out," said Oski, "there's a lot of wind there."
"There's more than I wanted," grinned Bronit. Now that there was some action again, he had charge of his senses. It was that peculiar period of frustrated uncertainty which had nearly gotten Bronit. It had, in fact, nearly gotten all of them. From his own safety straps, the captain could operate the manual controls. He was stabbing at keys, pulling at levers, checking and rechecking the dials. "That's all I could do," he said at last, just making his voice audible above the rushing roar of the wind sounding outside. "Hold tight and pray hard!" There was a crash. The ship seemed to turn into jelly underneath them in the way that their own lives had turned to jelly a little while earlier. Everything seemed to collapse onto itself. There was a period of wild chaos, darkness, and confusion.
Here ends Session 22.